Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm Cincinnati-based illustrator John McCoy, and this is part 20 of Learning to Draw with Andrew Loomis's Fun with a Pencil. And in this part, we're going to focus on clothing because that is an important step in our process of learning to draw the figure. So basically, on page 68, Andrew Loomis takes a break from drawing the figure that we've been learning to draw, and he has this reference sheet of clothing for drawing the figure. As we learned the meatballs, adding the flesh to the skeleton, we were learning the other day. He has a brief section about how to draw using these references that are basically a little doll or something. He's using the reference for that. I'm going to kind of brush over that part as it just continues to flesh out the idea that we were talking about in the last few parts. We're going to learn a little bit about clothing, and then we're going to some other parts like these hats and shoes and then hands. And then after that, we get into some more fun stuff where we are kind of, in the way I look at it, as in the beginning, we went from a Blook ball, and then we got more advanced and we went to the divided ball and plane method. And I feel like we're actually reversing that in a sense, because we are doing this figure that he has created for us, which is very defined. And later we learn some trick stuff, which is starts on page 74, I believe, where we go back into sort of a combination. Starts on 74, 75, and then we go into this, which is kind of like a figure version of the Blook ball. So we're kind of like combining all of the knowledge we've learned so far. But it is good to talk a little bit about the clothing and how to draw clothing. But basically, we have certain forms, and what happens is we drape clothing over top of those forms, and there are certain laws that occur. Imagine that this was a table, and we've draped this cloth over the top of this cylinder. Basically, the cylinder is still underneath, and there are certain rules where these folds of the fabric follow these laws. And if you drape fabric over something, it has certain rules that apply. When the fabric clumps up and builds these wrinkles, but towards gravity, toward the top of the gravity, it flattens out and smooths out, and there's less wrinkles, and gravity pulls down these forms and so forth. And basically, the human body is no different. You're putting cloth over the top of it, and that is creating basically you can see the form of the person beneath the clothing, but you can still see the artifacts of the clothing, what's happening with the clothing on top. It creates these wrinkles, it produces these folds, depends on the texture of the clothing, how thick the cloth is, so forth. So we begin with some of the simple stuff on page 68, which is the suit. And Andrew Loomis says, a ball, a square, and a triangle can be the foundation for a coat or a suit jacket. In the side and 3/4 view, the ball is flattened at back and cut down in front. Trousers are not as easy. Okay, so he starts with this ball, or the sphere, or circle, and then on top of that, he's got the triangle, and the triangle meets at the bottom of the circle in this sense. So you have this triangle, and then he has a square, which basically lines up with the bottom of the circle, and that's a square. And that is the basic outline of that. And over top of that, then, looking at this reference here on the edge of the screen, you can see how there is symmetry to that. And he draws these shapes following these underlying shapes of triangle, circle, and square. And then you can see how the clothing can be extruded from that. And now it would be important, if you're going to learn this technique, to learn how to draw it from the side view, just so you can see how that is affected, because he's underlined the same shapes. We have the same circle, and then we have a little bit of the triangle here. And we're still seeing it is like a foreshortened, like we've turned the triangle sideways, so to speak. And he didn't draw the square this time on the second version, but you can follow his drawing and extract the same thing that we've drawn here. You can see how basically the suit kind of reflects the body, in the sense that this circle could be considered the chest ball in one sense. And now you notice how he doesn't draw this part is excluded, but he draws over top of that, and I'll draw with darker ink so you can see what I'm saying. What I've drawn here now with darker ink is the parts he's chosen to take out of those shapes. This is the top of the collar. This is like a suit jacket you'd wear at a fancy event. And this piece goes down straight like this. And he did not draw the sleeve here, but the arm is positioned back here, the opening of the sleeve, so to speak. And then drawing that form. And then he had a little bit of buttons there for details. Okay, so that's what Andrew Loomis is saying is the easiest, or he's starting with this because it's a little easier. And why? Because the suit jacket is more of a stiffer material by design, and it doesn't reveal as many wrinkles. The wrinkles start showing up more in the sleeves and so forth. So let's switch to another page of the sketchbook. And we are going to start with the trousers here on the second line. Okay, so here's where he says the trousers are not as easy, but remember that folds radiate from joints and crinkles on opposite sides. You should study folds from life to understand them. Knees, elbows, hips, and buttons cause folds. So here we got a little bit of sleeves too, and we can kind of just study some of these forms. In the far left, you have the trouser is not folded in any way, shape, or form. It still does have some wrinkles to it because naturally it has changes in forms. You can draw the rough form if you want, and then go in and add some detail with ink over top. This is like the belt loops. That you draw the belt loops here, and it comes down sort of an angle here. They have the pocket, and then the front of the pant leg. And then you'll notice how this piece, because this is cuffed here, there's a little cuff in the fabric, that there is a fold that bends up here over the top of it. You'll see that. And then out of the cuff itself is a little wrinkle coming out. And then this is almost like a stitch that happens in most pants. And then you have some folds here because the form is changing. And folds can be drawn simply by marks like this. You don't have to go too detailed or scientifically analyze them and make sure that you have them 100% correct. Really, practicing from life is what's going to give you the best understanding of this. But I wanted to stick to Andrew Loomis's book because that's what we're studying here, and use the examples, which are pretty valuable as well. Now we'll see here in the second one how we rough this in, and the knee is beginning to bend backwards. So with the knee bending backwards, we're going to be, I'm just drawing the rough form in first, and then some of these forms here just to give myself an idea, some rough ideas of where the angles of the lines that create the folds and so forth. Now I'm going to jump in with the ink and put in some more detail on that. So again, at the top, we have a rough indication of where the belt loops would be. We have the pocket and so forth. And this part, because folds are not going to happen on the part that's being stretched out, if that makes sense. So on the front of the pant leg, the fabric, because the knee is bending backwards, is being pulled and stretched this way, which means similar to gravity, which you're seeing here, how the folds are pulled down in the top, or like I showed you in the previous drawing I did with the ball and the fabric that I roughed out from my imagination, that the top was stretched flat. In the same way, when something is folding back in this direction, the plane or the surface on the front is going to be stretched and it's going to be smoother, whereas most of the folds and creases are going to be happening behind. So every time the form takes a change, you're going to see some folds happening there. And then they create a crease when it's not really, it's like a crease is like a very large wrinkle. It's, well, even more so than that, it's when you have something where the fabric billows up. This is like a cross section I'm showing you right here. So we're looking straight down as if you analyze the fabric and the folds of it. This creates a crease, and that would be this line going up here, where the actual analyzing it, there's bumps. If you look at the side, if you were to tilt this whole surface up here this way, you'd see that there was a crease, a kind of I was just planting in my garden, and I dug a row deeper of soil to plant the potatoes in, and you could see the two hills on either side after I dug out of it. That's similar to what a crease is, what you're seeing here. Okay, so this one, we have another crease here, and really there is a science to creases and folds and how they interact with the human body, but the thing is you're going to get more benefit not analyzing it in a mathematical sense, but just an intuitive sense, and that comes from observing it from live observation. So that is something I would recommend doing, and that's something that Andrew Loomis recommends as well, saying that somewhere around here. Yeah, he says that I'm trying to think where he says that, but he says that it's best to draw from live observation. Okay, now we're going to jump onto the third one here, which is this part, because in this part we're going to stop because we're not going to do this one right here. That's a little too much. So this is a pretty extreme fold, and then we have the crotch of the character, and then the backside, and then the pant leg, and that knee is bending. So you're seeing the folds of the knee. This is the one, for me, what starts to make more sense, because this one is such a subtle curve of a crease or something like that that doesn't make too much sense. But once you see that this form is actually, I don't know if it's my study over a long period of time getting used to that, or if it's just an intuitive thing to understand, but this whole thing makes more sense to me than this one. But it is true to what he said, how the folds radiate from joints. So here you have a joint and they're radiating out. And I'll use ink to express that a little more. Here's the joint, and the folds themselves are radiating out. It's pretty cool. That's some of the more predictable nature of that. So these folds, and when the fabric has nowhere to go and it's being pushed into an area, it pillows up. It builds these layers, which you're seeing here. The same thing is happening in every imaginable area on this, where you're seeing these wrinkles come out. So it makes sense. The more you see it happen in nature, it makes sense. But there you have it. That is the pant leg, like so. All right, so let's do one of the dresses here. These are interesting because they have the sash around there. So the Andrew Loomis is saying the bust, the hips, the shoulder, and the knees are all important in the drape of women's clothing. And the reason is because you're seeing the underlying form underneath the clothing. But when you have things like sashes and stuff like that go tight around the figure, it behaves in a different way. It's very interesting. The fabric is free to move in certain areas, but not in others. And here you have, the back view, like here, where you can see sort of the gesture of the leg, where there's a knee here. And the sash is tight, but then when the fabric has room to breathe, it comes out of the top here, but then gravity pulls it down, so you get like this fold, which he is describing here, where the fabric is falling over top of the sash a little bit. That fold comes out and it falls down, and then wherever it can, it's obviously being pulled back up, so you have this tautness to it, but if it's permitted, it will fall over top of the sash here. There's really no other way of describing that. He's kind of put in the center line and stuff, but it's important how the interesting thing about fabric and clothing when related to the human figure is that the human figure is predictable and has rules and stuff that we've learned in previous parts. But fabric follows all of those rules and yet has its own dynamic as well. And there's, based off the plethora of angles the human body can be in, and based off the plethora of different types of clothing there are, the different forms of the clothing itself, a massive database of information that really you're going to have to study for a long time. But the principles are going to start to become apparent the more you draw. You're going to recognize the same things happening. And he has laid out some of those things. The way folds radiate away from joints, and where you have creases and stuff is when a form changes and the fabric becomes pinched in an area, like this, like this, like this, like here, because of this sash pushing the form in. Generally, when you have a belt, the folds of the fabric get pushed together, and where they're normally taut, when the fabric pushes in, you get the folds happening. It's a very interesting topic. Let's do a little bit of this one here to understand that. You have this large belly and these forms underneath. So you're seeing a lot of the figure underneath, but then, of course, beneath that, he's drawn a gesture of the leg, and then you have the other leg coming out here. And then on top of this gesture, you have what is happening with the fabric. So it's like a double analysis. But it will, I would just say, have faith in yourself and keep practicing, because it will start to make sense. It has its own form to it. It has its laws, its rules that make sense. This is not random stuff. The fabric is behaving based off the laws of physics. It's not going to do anything weird that doesn't make sense. Everything is going to make sense, especially the more you study it. You will understand that these things make sense. This is exactly what I was talking about with the sash. I think it's really cool. This fascinates me, how when you tie this cloth like this, you have a tightened form, and yet the actual width of this, it's like you have this column. Oh, sorry, here. You have a column. Let's say it's like a tube of fabric. So you have this tube of fabric, which is basically a cylinder. Picture this. And then when you tie something around it, but then you tighten it, what happens is that gets tightened like this. But with fabric, because this is not like clay where you squeeze it in the middle and it doesn't create wrinkles. The fabric is not this formed so much that the actual length of the fabric changes. So what you happen is it doubles over itself and you get these folds. But this is basically what actually is happening everywhere. When you get a form that's pushed into a certain way, and this is the nature of fabric itself, it has nowhere to go, so it folds over the top of the other. It's not so thick and so non-movable and pliable that it refuses to, and it gets crushed like metal or a can or something like that. It can move, but it can't change its length, so it just folds over top of it. And that's basically what happens. I hope that really helps you. The more you understand that, well, you can understand fabric, that when you have these sashes and so forth, these folds have nowhere to, this fabric has nowhere to go, and it folds over itself and creates all of these little wrinkles. The same as when fabric is stretched. when it's stretched by this arm moving back all this way, you get these lines of movement because the fabric is being pulled, but it can't stay flat and plain because it's being condensed and it's being squeezed. So the folds again are forced to go towards each other. And since they can't stay flat, they just wrinkle over each other. It is a very interesting situation. But then all of the plethora of ways the human body can move around and the different body types you have creates so many different potentials. And you just have to study it. You just have to do a lot of this. But it's a rewarding thing to study because it makes so much sense the more you learn it. And it's pretty fun to draw as well. So we have that. And then, of course, the stitching itself is somewhat of a belt in a sense, because radiating out from the stitching, you get these little wrinkles and so forth. So another cool thing is when the fabric is being pushed up, like this shelf of fabric you're seeing here is pushing up, it has nowhere to go but over top of what's above it to a degree. So you end up getting these nice folds like that as well. The same thing is happening, really, but you don't have to analyze it in terms of some kind of like, you don't have to wrap your mind around how a black hole works to be able to draw this stuff. You really just need to practice. But you're going to see and recognize the same thing occurring and so forth. But when you learn to do the clothing, and by the way, not all clothing is difficult. The stiffer the material, the more it behaves, the more it does not change based off of how it's moved. And it moves less because it's not going to move. So if you draw one of these hats, they just become predictable geometrical shapes. You can draw an ellipse, you can draw another ellipse on top of it in the center, and then you can extrude it out by creating lines that follow perspective. And you can end up creating another semi-ellipse at the top here with different folds and different shapes. And what you end up getting is a hat. So there are certain forms which are a lot more forgiving that don't really change. And then when you analyze it in terms of what we learned about all the faces and stuff like that, you can put the ball inside of the hat and then continue to draw the divided ball and plane method, and eventually you can just move these objects around. But you can see how he's done a really good job about drawing it in perspective and showing how no matter how you tilt it, look at this, start with the band. That's pretty cool. So in that case, he's just drawn a line of perspective. He's drawn another rectangle in that line of perspective going vertically. It's like a flat sheet. And then he is starting the band by wrapping it around. It starts here and here. And it basically creates an ellipse here. And then another ellipse, and it's the band. It goes around there, and then you build up. So there's a lot of ways of doing this. Build the crown or brim as you wish. So he's showing the axis as a perspective and stuff. It's really cool, and there's a variety of hats. As far as this, we'll go into that later. The shoes are different because we'll be going over feet and stuff like that. But I'm going to wrap it up for this video. I feel like we've learned a lot in this video, and let me know what you've learned. You know, write a comment in there and tell us what did you learn from this video? What's a takeaway that you took away that really you found very useful or very helpful, or something maybe I explained in a certain way you hadn't heard before and it helped you to understand it. Share that in the comments, and it might end up helping another viewer. Maybe they see it and it helps them understand this something. Because one thing that's cool about all these videos that I've been making with learning to draw with Andy Loomis is fun with the pencil is that so many people have commented and shared how something helped them understand something or enlightened them to a different angle of viewing how to draw a certain thing. And that's pretty cool, because for me I found that helpful as well, because I never thought about it a certain way. Somebody describes how a form works or something like that, and it opened my eyes to seeing something in a new way. And the more you see through the lens of drawing how to draw things, you're seeing it from so many different angles. Oh, somebody draws it like this, somebody draws it like this. The more you do that, the more you recognize underlying patterns that stay the same, and that strengthens your ability to understand. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you do, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends and family, your loved ones. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. I'm always releasing really cool content that I find is going to probably help you guys out and is really useful. I hope so for you guys. And thank you so much for watching. I really couldn't do this without you, and I really appreciate all the support you guys give me on my channel too. Until next time, God bless you guys.